Can you imagine a world where the simple act of sharing a piece of candy could unravel a web of secrets and deception? It began on a sweltering afternoon, August 14, 1944, at precisely 1400 hours, inside the sprawling prisoner of war camp located just outside Roswell, New Mexico. The sun beat down mercilessly on the parched earth, baking the corrugated iron roofs of the barracks and turning the air thick and heavy. Sergeant Miller, a young, fresh-faced guard barely out of his teens, nervously patrolled the perimeter fence. The endless monotony of his duty weighed on him, the only variation being the occasional dust devil dancing across the barren landscape. Inside the compound, hundreds of German prisoners of war milled about, their faces a mixture of boredom, resentment, and a quiet desperation. Miller paused by a group of prisoners huddled near the mess hall. They were Luftwaffe pilots, distinguishable by the remnants of their crisp blue uniforms now faded and patched. He recognized one, a sharp-featured Oberleutnant named Klaus Richter, known for his icy demeanor and unnervingly intelligent eyes. On a whim, Miller reached into his pocket and pulled out a handful of M&Ms, the colorful candy that had become a staple of American soldiers' rations. He tossed them over the fence, a small gesture of goodwill or perhaps simply a way to break the suffocating monotony. The prisoners reacted with cautious curiosity. They picked up the candies, examining them with a mixture of suspicion and amusement. Richter, however, remained aloof, his eyes narrowed as he watched Miller, one of the younger pilots, a blonde-haired boy named Hans, popped an M&M into his mouth. His eyes widened in surprise. Unglaublich. He exclaimed, unbelievable. The others followed suit, their faces mirroring Hans's astonishment. They were captivated by the candy's hard shell and the melting chocolate inside. The fact that it didn't melt in the desert heat was a complete novelty, something they had never encountered before, but it wasn't just the candy itself that sparked their interest. It was Richter's reaction. He hadn't eaten one, he hadn't even touched them. He simply stared at the colorful pile on the ground, his face an unreadable mask. That night, Miller couldn't shake the image of Richter's intense gaze. What was it about the candy that had so captivated the prisoners, and why had Richter refused to partake? He dismissed it as mere curiosity, the simple wonder of men deprived of everyday luxuries. But something in the back of his mind told him there was more to it than met the eye. The next day, the atmosphere in the camp had subtly shifted. The prisoners seemed more animated, more engaged. They spoke in hushed tones, their eyes constantly darting about. Miller noticed that they were collecting the discarded M&M wrappers, carefully smoothing them out and tucking them into their pockets. He mentioned it to Sergeant Davies, a grizzled veteran who had seen his share of action. Davies scoffed. "They're bored, Miller. They're looking for anything to occupy their time. Don't read too much into it." But Miller couldn't shake his unease. He decided to keep a closer eye on Richter and his group. He began to notice patterns in their behavior. They would gather in secluded corners of the compound, their heads closed together, whispering intently. They seemed to be communicating in some kind of code, using subtle gestures and glances. One evening, as Miller was making his rounds, he saw Richter discreetly slip something into the hand of a cook, a portly, unassuming man named Schmidt. Schmidt immediately pocketed the object and hurried away. Miller's suspicions reached fever pitch. He knew something was going on, something that went beyond simple boredom or harmless camaraderie. He decided to investigate. He started by questioning Schmidt. The cook was evasive and nervous, stammering and avoiding eye contact. He claimed he didn't know what Miller was talking about, but Miller could see the lie in his eyes. Frustrated, Miller searched Schmidt's quarters. He found nothing of significance, only a few personal belongings and some well-worn cooking utensils. Just as he was about to give up, he noticed something odd. One of the floorboards was slightly loose. He pried it up and reached into the narrow space beneath. His fingers brushed against something smooth and flat. He pulled it out. It was an M&M wrapper, but not like the others. This one had been carefully unfolded and flattened. On the inside, someone had written a series of numbers and symbols in tiny, meticulous handwriting. Miller stared at the coded message, his mind racing. He had stumbled upon something significant, something that could potentially jeopardize the entire camp. But what did it mean? He took the wrapper to Lieutenant Colonel Parker, the camp commander, a stern and unyielding man known for his by-the-book approach. Parker dismissed Miller's concerns as paranoia. "Sergeant, these men are prisoners of war. They're not going to launch an attack with M&M wrappers. Stop wasting my time with these ridiculous theories." Miller was crestfallen. He knew he was onto something, but he couldn't convince anyone to take him seriously. He felt isolated and alone, burdened by the weight of his discovery. Undeterred, he decided to continue his investigation on his own. He started by studying the M&M wrappers more closely. He noticed that each wrapper had a different combination of numbers and symbols. He also realized that the colors of the candies themselves seemed to be significant. He began to suspect that the prisoners were using the M&Ms and their wrappers as a means of communication, a complex code hidden in plain sight. But what were they communicating about? What was their ultimate goal? He spent countless hours poring over maps of the area, searching for any clues that might shed light on the prisoners' plans. He researched the history of the Luftwaffe pilots, looking for any patterns or connections that might explain their behavior. The more he investigated, the more convoluted the mystery became. He discovered that Richter had a reputation as a brilliant strategist and a master of deception. He had been involved in several daring operations during the war, and he was known for his ability to think outside the box. Miller began to suspect that Richter was the mastermind behind the entire operation, using his intelligence and charisma to orchestrate a secret plot from within the confines of the prisoner of war camp. But what was the plot? Was it an escape attempt, a sabotage mission, or something even more sinister? One night, as Miller was observing the prisoners from the guard tower, he noticed something unusual. A group of prisoners was gathered near the perimeter fence, their faces illuminated by the faint glow of the moon. They were digging. Miller grabbed his rifle and rushed to the scene. He ordered the prisoners to stop digging, but they ignored him. They continued to shovel dirt with feverish intensity, their eyes filled with a desperate urgency. Miller fired a warning shot into the air. The prisoners froze, their faces etched with fear and defiance. He ordered them to drop their shovels and step away from the hole. As he approached the hole, he realized it wasn't an escape tunnel. It was too narrow, too shallow. It didn't lead anywhere. He peered into the darkness, his heart pounding in his chest. He saw something glinting in the moonlight. He reached down and pulled it out. It was a small metal box no bigger than his hand. It was locked. Miller ordered the prisoners to return to their barracks. He took the box to his quarters and tried to open it, but it was no use. The lock was too strong. He knew he had to open it. He had to know what was inside. He spent the next several hours trying to pick the lock, but he couldn't get it to budge. Finally, in desperation, he grabbed a hammer and smashed the lock open. He lifted the lid of the box and peered inside. His eyes widened in shock. The box was filled with M&Ms, but these weren't ordinary M&Ms. These were different colors, different sizes. Some were even hollow. Miller picked up one of the hollow M&Ms and shook it. He heard a faint rattling sound. He carefully cracked it open. Inside, he found a tiny rolled-up piece of paper. He unrolled the paper and read the message. It was written in German in a delicate, flowing script. His blood ran cold. The message was a list of names, American names, high-ranking officers, politicians, scientists, and at the bottom of the list, one name stood out, Lieutenant Colonel Parker. Miller's mind reeled. The prisoners weren't planning an escape. They weren't planning sabotage. They were planning something far more dangerous, something that could shake the very foundations of the United States. They were planning assassinations, but why and how? He had to warn Parker. He had to expose the prisoner's plot before it was too late. He raced to Parker's office, his heart pounding in his chest. He burst through the door, his breath coming in ragged gasps. "Sir, you're in danger," he exclaimed. "The prisoners are plotting to assassinate you." Parker looked at him with a mixture of amusement and annoyance. "Miller, have you lost your mind? Get out of my office before I have you arrested for insubordination." "But sir, I have proof," Miller insisted, holding out the list of names. "They're using the M&Ms to communicate. They're planning to kill you." Parker snatched the list from Miller's hand and glanced at it. His face paled. "What is this?" he demanded, his voice trembling. "It's a list of targets, sir," Miller explained. "The prisoners are planning to assassinate them, and your name is on the list." Parker stared at the list, his eyes wide with disbelief. He couldn't believe what he was seeing. "This is impossible," he muttered. "This can't be happening." Suddenly, the lights went out. The office plunged into darkness. Parker gasped. "What's going on?" A moment later, the door to the office burst open. A group of prisoners stormed inside, their faces contorted with rage. They were armed with knives and clubs. Miller knew that they were outnumbered and outgunned. But he couldn't back down. He had to protect Parker. He had to stop the prisoners from carrying out their deadly plot. He lunged at the prisoners, his fists flying. A fierce brawl erupted, the office filled with the sounds of shouting, cursing, and the sickening thud of blows. In the chaos, Miller managed to knock one of the prisoners to the ground. He grabbed the prisoner's knife and turned to face the others, but it was too late. One of the prisoners had already reached Parker. He raised his knife high above his head and plunged it down into Parker's chest. Parker screamed and collapsed to the floor. Miller watched in horror as the prisoners swarmed over Parker's body, stabbing him repeatedly. He knew that Parker was dead. He had failed. He had failed to protect his commanding officer. He had failed to stop the prisoner's deadly plot. He felt a wave of despair wash over him. Suddenly, he felt a sharp pain in his back. He cried out and stumbled forward. He turned around and saw one of the prisoners standing behind him, holding a bloodied knife. The prisoner smiled and raised the knife again. Miller knew that he was about to die. He closed his eyes and braced himself for the final blow, but it never came. Instead, he heard a loud crash. He opened his eyes and saw that the prisoners had stopped attacking him. They were staring at something behind him, their faces filled with fear and confusion. Miller turned around and saw what they were looking at. Standing in the doorway was a woman. She was dressed in a nurse's uniform. She was holding a gun. She pointed the gun at the prisoners and fired. The prisoners screamed and fell to the ground. The nurse continued to fire, methodically killing each of the prisoners. Miller watched in stunned silence as the nurse slaughtered the prisoners. He couldn't understand what was happening. Who was this woman? Why was she helping him when the last prisoner was dead? The nurse turned to Miller. She smiled. "Don't worry, Sergeant," she said. "I'm here to help you." Miller stared at her, his mind racing. He didn't know what to say. "Who are you?" he finally managed to ask. The nurse smiled again. "My name is Sarah," she said, "and I know everything." Sarah explained that she was an undercover agent working for the United States government. She had been sent to the prisoner of war camp to investigate rumors of a secret plot. She had discovered that the prisoners were indeed planning to assassinate high-ranking American officials. But she had also discovered something even more shocking. The prisoners weren't acting alone. They were being aided by someone on the inside, someone within the United States government. A traitor. Sarah had been trying to uncover the traitor's identity when the prisoners launched their attack on Parker. She had arrived just in time to save Miller's life. Now, she needed Miller's help to expose the traitor and stop their deadly plot. Miller didn't hesitate. He agreed to help Sarah in any way he could. Together, they began to piece together the puzzle, following the trail of clues left behind by the prisoners. They discovered a hidden network of spies and collaborators, all working together to undermine the United States from within. The more they investigated, the more dangerous the situation became. They were constantly being watched, constantly being followed. They knew that the traitor was aware of their investigation and was trying to stop them. One night, Sarah and Miller were searching Parker's office for clues when they heard a noise outside. They peeked out the window and saw a group of men approaching the building. They were armed. Sarah and Miller knew that they were in danger. They had to escape. They slipped out of the office and fled into the darkness. They ran through the woods trying to evade their pursuers, but the men were too fast. They caught up to Sarah and Miller and surrounded them. Sarah and Miller were trapped. They knew that they were about to be captured or killed. Suddenly, Sarah had an idea. She pulled out a small metal box from her pocket. It was the same box that Miller had found in the prisoner's tunnel. The box filled with M&Ms. Sarah opened the box and held it out to the men. "Here," she said, "take these." The men looked at the box with confusion. They didn't understand what Sarah was doing. "What is this?" one of the men asked. "It's candy," Sarah said. "Take it, it's a gift." The men hesitated for a moment, then reached out and took the M&Ms from the box. They popped the candies into their mouths and began to chew. Suddenly, their faces contorted in pain. They clutched their stomachs and fell to the ground, writhing in agony. Sarah smiled. "These aren't ordinary M&Ms, she said. "They're poisoned." The men screamed and died. Sarah and Miller watched in silence as the men's bodies lay still on the ground. They had survived, for now, but they knew that the traitor was still out there. And they knew that the traitor would stop at nothing to silence them. They had to find the traitor. They had to expose their plot, before it was too late. The next day, Sarah and Miller received a message from a secret informant. The informant claimed to know the identity of the traitor. The informant agreed to meet Sarah and Miller at a secluded location outside the camp. Sarah and Miller drove to the meeting place, their hearts pounding in their chests. They knew that this could be their chance to finally expose the traitor. But they also knew that it could be a trap. They arrived at the meeting place and waited for the informant to arrive. After a few minutes, a figure emerged from the shadows. It was Schmidt, the cook. Miller and Sarah were surprised. They had never suspected that Schmidt was involved in the plot. Schmidt told them that he had been forced to help the prisoners. He had been threatened by the traitor, who had promised to harm his family if he didn't cooperate. Schmidt revealed that the traitor was none other than Lieutenant Davies. Miller and Sarah were shocked. Davies was a trusted veteran, a man who had always seemed loyal and dedicated. They couldn't believe that he was the traitor. Schmidt explained that Davies had been secretly working for the German government for years. He had been providing them with information about American military operations. He had also been helping the prisoners to plan their assassination plot. Davies' motive was simple: greed. The German government had promised him a large sum of money in exchange for his services. Schmidt agreed to testify against Davies in court. He knew that he was risking his life, but he felt that it was his duty to do the right thing. Sarah and Miller thanked Schmidt for his courage. They promised to protect him from Davies and his accomplices. Together, they planned to expose Davies and bring him to justice. The next day, Sarah and Miller confronted Davies. They presented him with the evidence they had gathered against him. Davies denied everything. He claimed that he was being framed, but Sarah and Miller knew that he was lying. They arrested Davies and took him into custody. Davies was put on trial for treason. Schmidt testified against him, providing damning evidence of his guilt. The jury found Davies guilty on all counts. He was sentenced to life in prison. With Davies behind bars, the assassination plot was foiled. The American officials on the prisoners' list were safe. Sarah and Miller had saved the day, but their work wasn't over. They knew that there were still other spies and collaborators working to undermine the United States. They vowed to continue their fight against treason, to protect their country from its enemies, both foreign and domestic. Years later, Miller would often reflect on his experiences at the prisoner of war camp. He would remember the M&Ms, the coded messages, and the deadly plot that had almost succeeded. He would also remember Sarah, the brave and resourceful undercover agent who had risked her life to save him and his country. He would be forever grateful for her courage and her dedication. But there was one question that continued to haunt him, a question that he could never quite answer. Why had Davies betrayed his country? What had driven him to sell his soul to the enemy? He knew that he would never fully understand Davies' motives. But he also knew that he could never forget the lessons he had learned at the prisoner of war camp. The lessons about loyalty, courage, and the importance of fighting for what is right. Back in the present, Sarah and Miller had exposed the traitor Lieutenant Davies. But during the investigation of the prisoner's quarters, Miller found a diary hidden beneath a loose floorboard, much like the one where the coded M&M wrapper was discovered. This one belonged to Oberleutnant Richter. Most of the entries were mundane, detailing daily life in the camp, complaints about the food, and longing for home. However, one entry, dated just a week before the assassination attempt, stood out. It was written in a different ink, a deeper shade of black, and the handwriting was rushed and frantic. The entry spoke of a package that had arrived, something far more valuable than information or weapons. It mentioned a key and a song, cryptic terms that sent shivers down Miller's spine. The diary entry ended with a chilling sentence. The symphony begins soon, prepare the instruments. Miller felt a knot of dread tightening in his stomach. This wasn't just about assassinations, it was about something bigger, something more sinister. He shared the diary entry with Sarah and they both realized that Davy's capture was just the beginning. There was still a larger game afoot. The package, the key, the song, it all pointed to something else, something hidden waiting to be unleashed. What was this symphony, and what role did the prisoners play beyond their foiled assassination attempts? Did you like it? Leave your comment and tell us if you've ever heard any interesting stories about World War Roman II/WW2 story. Miller felt a knot of dread tightening in his stomach. This wasn't just about assassinations, it was about something bigger, something more sinister. He shared the diary entry with Sarah and they both realized that Davy's capture was just the beginning. There was still a larger game afoot. The package, the key, the song, it all pointed to something else, something hidden waiting to be unleashed. What was this symphony, and what role did the prisoners play beyond their foiled assassination attempts? The world inside the prisoner of war camp was a microcosm of the larger conflict, a place where boredom and desperation intertwined, creating a fertile ground for secrets and intrigue. The barbed wire fence that surrounded the compound was more than just a physical barrier. It was a symbol of the invisible walls that separated the prisoners from their past lives and from any hope of a future. Days bled into weeks, each one marked by the same monotonous routine: roll call, meager meals, and endless hours of idle chatter or silent contemplation. The guards, mostly young men like Miller, were tasked with maintaining order and preventing escape, but their vigilance was often dulled by the sheer tedium of their duty. Sergeant Miller, despite his youth, had a keen sense of observation and an unwavering commitment to his duty. He wasn't like the other guards, who saw the prisoners as a faceless mass of enemy combatants. He saw them as individuals, each with their own stories and their own reasons for being there. This empathy, however, didn't cloud his judgment. He understood that these men were still the enemy, and he was determined to prevent them from causing any harm. Oberleutnant Klaus Richter was a different breed of prisoner. He carried himself with an air of quiet authority, even in the confines of the camp. His sharp features and piercing eyes seemed to penetrate the surface, as if he were constantly analyzing his surroundings and assessing the weaknesses of those around him. He was a man of few words, but when he spoke, people listened. He was a natural leader, and even in captivity, he commanded the respect of his fellow prisoners. The discovery of Richter's diary injected a new sense of urgency into Miller and Sarah's investigation. The cryptic references to a package, a key, and a song suggested a plan far more elaborate than a simple assassination plot. They knew they had to decipher the meaning of these clues before it was too late. The immediate question was the package. If Davies wasn't the target, then what was of so much value to this group? Miller suggested going back to Schmidt. The portly cook might have known more than he initially let on. After the dust had settled from the thwarted assassination attempt and Davies' arrest, the atmosphere in the camp was thick with suspicion. The prisoners were subdued, their faces etched with fear and uncertainty. They knew that their plot had been exposed and they were waiting for the inevitable consequences. Miller and Sarah moved cautiously through the compound, their senses on high alert. They knew that the traitor's accomplices were still at large and they could be anywhere. They found Schmidt in the mess hall, scrubbing pots with a vigor that seemed almost frantic. He looked up as they approached, his eyes wide with apprehension. "Sergeant Miller, Miss Sarah," he stammered, wiping his brow with a greasy rag. "What can I do for you?" Miller cut to the chase. "Schmidt, we know you were involved in the prisoner's plot. We know you helped them. We also know that you are protecting someone else." Schmidt's face paled. I don't know what you're talking about," he stammered. Sarah stepped forward, her voice firm but compassionate. "Schmidt, we know you were threatened. We know you were afraid for your family, but it's over now. Davies is in custody. You don't have to be afraid anymore, but you must tell us what the package is." Tears welled up in Schmidt's eyes. He dropped the pot he was holding and it clattered against the floor. "I can't," he whispered. "They'll kill me." Miller placed a hand on Schmidt's shoulder. "We'll protect you, Schmidt, we promise. Just tell us what you know." Schmidt hesitated for a moment, then took a deep breath. "The package had arrived a few weeks ago. It was delivered by a woman." "A woman," they both thought. Sarah pressed. "What woman? Did you see her?" Schmidt nodded. "She was a nurse. She came to the camp to tend to the sick prisoners." A nurse, another mysterious woman involved in the plot. Miller's mind raced. Was this the same nurse who had saved him from the prisoner's attack? Was she a double agent working for both sides? "What did the package contain?" Sarah asked. Schmidt shook his head. "I don't know. It was small, wrapped in brown paper. Richter took it immediately. I never saw it again." "But you heard them talk about it?" Miller pressed. "What did they say?" Schmidt wrung his hands nervously. "They said it was the key to everything, the key to their freedom, the key to something else." The key, another piece of the puzzle. Miller felt like he was getting closer to the truth, but he was still missing crucial pieces. "Did they mention anything else? Anything about a song, a symphony?" Schmidt's eyes widened. "Yes, they did. They said that the package was the key to unlocking the song. They said that once the song was played, everything would change." Miller and Sarah exchanged a look. The symphony, it was more than just a metaphor. It was a plan, a strategy, a series of events that would be set in motion once the key was used to unlock the song. The question was, what was the song and what would happen when it was played? Miller decided to focus on the nurse. She was the only link they had to the package. He needed to find her, to question her, to uncover the truth about her involvement in the plot. He tasked several guards with searching the camp for the nurse, but she was nowhere to be found. It was as if she had vanished into thin air. Frustration gnawed at Miller. He felt like he was chasing shadows, getting closer to the truth only to have it slip through his fingers. Sarah, meanwhile, focused on Richter's diary. She pored over the cryptic entries, searching for any clue that might shed light on the meaning of the song. She studied the German language, looking for hidden meanings or double entendres. She researched musical terminology, hoping to find a connection between the symphony and some kind of military operation or code. Days turned into nights and still they found nothing. The mystery remained as elusive as ever. The tension in the camp was palpable. The prisoners were growing restless, their hopes buoyed by the knowledge that something was about to happen. Miller could feel it in the air, a sense of anticipation, of impending change. He knew that he was running out of time. He had to decipher the meaning of the symphony before it was too late. One evening, as Miller was reviewing the camp's records, he stumbled upon something that caught his eye. It was a list of prisoners who had been transferred to the camp in recent months. He scanned the list, looking for any familiar names. Suddenly, one name jumped out at him. It was the name of a renowned German composer, a man who had been rumored to be working on a secret project for the Nazi regime. Composer's name was Wilhelm Strauss. Miller felt a jolt of excitement. Could this be the connection he was looking for? Could Strauss be the key to unlocking the meaning of the symphony? He immediately ordered the guards to bring Strauss to his office. When Strauss arrived, he was a frail, gaunt man, his eyes hollow and his face pale. He looked like he hadn't slept in days. Miller offered him a chair and a glass of water. Strauss accepted the water gratefully, his hands trembling as he brought the glass to his lips. Herr Strauss, Miller began, I understand that you are a composer. Strauss nodded slowly. Yes, that is correct. I also understand that you were working on a secret project for the German government. Strauss's eyes flickered nervously. I don't know what you're talking about. Miller leaned forward, his voice firm but respectful. Herr Strauss, we know about the symphony, we know about the package, we know about the key, we just need you to tell us what it all means. Strauss remained silent for a moment, his eyes darting around the room. Then he took a deep breath and said, the symphony, it's a code, a series of musical notes that when played in the correct sequence will trigger a series of events. What kind of events? Miller asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Strauss hesitated for a moment, then said, devastating ones. Sarah had been quietly observing the interrogation. She stepped forward. What is the target of this symphony? Strauss looked at her, his eyes filled with fear. I can't tell you, he whispered. They'll kill me. Miller stood up and walked over to the window. He looked out at the prisoner of war camp, at the barbed wire fence and the watchtowers. He thought about the men inside, the prisoners who were willing to risk everything for their cause. He thought about the traitor Davies who had betrayed his country for money. And he thought about the symphony, the deadly code that could unleash devastation on the world. He turned back to Strauss. Herr Strauss, he said, you have a choice to make. You can help us stop this symphony or you can let it play out and watch the world burn. The choice is yours. Strauss looked at Miller, his eyes filled with anguish. He knew that Miller was right. He couldn't let the symphony play out. He had to do something to stop it, even if it meant risking his own life. I'll tell you everything, he said, but you have to promise me that you'll protect me. Miller nodded. We promise. Strauss began to explain the symphony. He revealed that it was a complex series of musical notes that corresponded to specific locations and events. When the symphony was played, it would trigger a series of explosions that would cripple the United States infrastructure. The targets included power plants, bridges, and military installations. The goal was to cripple the United States and pave the way for a German invasion. The package, Strauss explained, contained a device that could transmit the symphony to the various targets. The key was a code that would activate the device. And the song was the symphony itself, written in a complex musical notation that only a trained composer could decipher. Miller and Sarah listened in horror as Strauss revealed the details of the plot. They knew that they had to stop the symphony from being played, but they were running out of time. The device could be activated at any moment. Miller asked Strauss where the device was hidden. Strauss said that it was hidden somewhere in the prisoner of war camp, but he didn't know exactly where. He said that Richter was the only one who knew the location of the device. Miller and Sarah knew that they had to find Richter and force him to reveal the location of the device, but Richter was a formidable opponent. He was intelligent, resourceful, and utterly ruthless. Miller knew that it wouldn't be easy to get him to talk. They found Richter in his barracks, sitting on his bunk and staring out the window. He looked up as they entered, his eyes cold and defiant. Sergeant Miller, he said, his voice dripping with sarcasm. What brings you to my humble abode? Miller ignored the sarcasm. Richter, we know about the symphony, we know about the package, we know about the key, we just need you to tell us where the device is hidden. Richter smirked. I have no idea what you're talking about. Sarah stepped forward, her voice icy. Don't play dumb with us, Richter. We know you're the mastermind behind this plot. We know you're the one who's been pulling the strings. Richter laughed. You have no proof of anything, you can't touch me. Miller pulled out Richter's diary and showed it to him. This says otherwise. Richter's face paled as he saw the diary. He realized that they knew everything. All right, he said, you got me, but you'll never find the device. It's hidden too well. We'll find it, Richter, Miller said. We always do. But it would be a lot easier if you just told us where it is. Richter hesitated for a moment, then said, it's hidden in the chapel. The chapel? Miller and Sarah exchanged a look of surprise. They had searched the chapel several times, but they had found nothing. Where in the chapel? Miller asked. Richter smirked. That's for you to find out. Miller and Sarah raced to the chapel, their hearts pounding in their chests. They searched every nook and cranny, but they couldn't find anything. Just when they were about to give up, Miller noticed something odd about the altar. It was slightly askew. He reached behind the altar and felt a small hidden compartment. He opened the compartment and found a metal box. He opened the box and found the device. It was a small, intricate piece of machinery with a series of buttons and switches. Miller knew that this was it. This was the device that could unleash devastation on the United States. He quickly disabled the device, preventing it from transmitting the symphony. The symphony had been silenced, but Miller knew that their work wasn't over. They still had to find the key, the code that could activate the device. They interrogated Richter again, but he refused to reveal the location of the key. He said that it was hidden somewhere outside the camp and he would never tell them where. Miller and Sarah were frustrated. They had come so close to stopping the symphony, but they were still missing a crucial piece of the puzzle. Just when they were about to give up, Sarah had an idea. She remembered something that Strauss had said about the symphony. He had said that it was written in a complex musical notation that only a trained composer could decipher. She realized that the key might also be hidden in a musical notation. She asked Strauss if he knew anything about the key. Strauss said that he did. He said that the key was hidden in a song, a traditional German folk song that was known to only a few people. He said that the song contained a series of musical notes that, when played in the correct sequence, would reveal the code that could activate the device. Miller and Sarah were excited. They had finally found the key to stopping the symphony. They asked Strauss to sing the song for them. Strauss hesitated for a moment, then began to sing. His voice was weak and trembling, but the melody was clear and haunting. As he sang, Sarah wrote down the musical notes. When he finished, she had a complete musical score. She studied the score, looking for any patterns or clues. Suddenly, she noticed something odd. There were a series of notes that were slightly out of place. They didn't seem to fit with the rest of the melody. She realized that these notes might be the key. She rearranged the notes in a different sequence and discovered a hidden code. It was a series of numbers and letters that corresponded to a specific frequency. She realized that this frequency was the key to activating the device. Miller and Sarah raced back to the device and entered the frequency. The device sprang to life, its lights flashing and its gears whirring. Miller knew that they had to stop it before it was too late. He quickly disabled the device, preventing it from transmitting the symphony. The symphony had been silenced, for good. But even with the device and the code now disabled, Strauss seemed nervous, more afraid than he had when he first came in. What is it? Sarah asked, noticing his discomfort. There's still the matter of the instruments. Miller and Sarah exchanged confused glances. Instruments? What instruments? The chilling realization slowly crept into their minds. This was more than just about disabling a device. It was about something far more complex, far more dangerous. If the symphony was the code and the device the transmitter, then the instruments, they must be the agents, the people on the ground ready to execute the plan. The assassination attempts were just a distraction, a way to keep them occupied while the real plan unfolded. Miller, his face grim, turned to Strauss. Who are the instruments? Who is supposed to carry out the plan? Strauss swallowed hard, his eyes darting nervously around the room. I don't know, he stammered. Swear I only know about the music, the code. I don't know who the agents are. Miller stared intently at Strauss, trying to gauge whether he was telling the truth. He seemed genuinely afraid, but Miller couldn't shake the feeling that he was still holding something back. Think, Strauss, this is a matter of life and death. If you know anything, you have to tell us. Strauss wrung his hands, his face contorted with fear. There was talk, he whispered, of sleeper cells planted long ago waiting for the signal. But I don't know who they are or where they are located. Sleeper cells. That meant there were German agents embedded within American society waiting for the signal to unleash chaos. The scope of the operation was far greater than they had initially imagined. Sarah, ever the quick thinker, focused on the immediate threat. What was the signal? How were these sleeper cells supposed to be activated? Strauss hesitated, then whispered, a word. A single word spoken on the radio during a specific program. A word that would trigger their programming and set them in motion. A single word, that was all it took to unleash a wave of destruction. Miller felt a cold dread wash over him. They had disabled the device, deciphered the code, but they hadn't stopped the symphony. They had only delayed it. The instruments were still out there, waiting for their cue. What was the program? Miller demanded. What program would carry the signal? Strauss shook his head, his eyes wide with terror. I don't know. I swear I don't know. They never told me the specific program, only that it would be a popular one, something that many people would be listening to. A popular program. That narrowed it down, but not by much. There were countless popular radio programs in the United States, ranging from news broadcasts to musical performances to comedy shows. How could they possibly identify the one that would carry the deadly signal? Time was running out. The signal could be broadcast at any moment, unleashing the sleeper cells and plunging the country into chaos. Miller and Sarah exchanged a desperate look. They were facing an invisible enemy, an enemy that could strike at any time in any place. They had to find a way to identify the program, to intercept the signal, to stop the symphony before it was too late. Suddenly, Miller remembered something that Richter had said. He had said that the device was hidden in the chapel because it was a place of peace, a place where no one would suspect anything. He realized that the choice of the chapel might be significant. The Germans were masters of symbolism, and they often used religious imagery to convey hidden meanings. He turned to Sarah. The program, he said, it might be a religious broadcast. Sarah's eyes widened. You mean a church service, a gospel show? It was a possibility. Religious broadcasts were popular in the United States, and they often attracted a large audience. Miller and Sarah began to investigate religious broadcasts, listening to every sermon, every hymn, every prayer. They were searching for any sign of the hidden signal, any clue that might reveal the deadly word. Days turned into nights, and still they found nothing. The tension was unbearable. Miller could feel the weight of responsibility pressing down on him. He knew that the fate of the country rested on his shoulders. Just when he was about to lose hope, Sarah noticed something odd about one of the religious broadcasts. It was a gospel show hosted by a charismatic preacher named Reverend Johnson. During the show, Reverend Johnson would often pause in the middle of his sermon and ask his listeners to send in prayer requests. He would then read the prayer requests on the air and offer a prayer for each one. Sarah noticed that one of the prayer requests was unusually cryptic. It read, "Please pray for my brother who is lost and seeking guidance. He needs to find his way back to the fold." Sarah felt a shiver run down her spine. The phrase "back to the fold" sounded like a code, a signal. She played back the recording of the show and listened to Reverend Johnson's response to the prayer request. The Reverend read the request in a calm, soothing voice. Then he paused for a moment and said, "We will pray for your brother, my dear. May he find solace and harmony." Harmony, that was the word that would trigger the sleeper cells and unleash chaos on the United States. Miller and Sarah exchanged a horrified look. They had found the signal, but they were too late. As soon as Reverend Johnson spoke the word harmony, the radio signal cut off. A moment of silence, then static. They stared at the radio in stunned silence. "It's begun," Sarah whispered, her voice trembling. "The symphony has begun." Miller sprang into action. He contacted the military authorities and informed them of the situation. He ordered them to put the country on high alert and to prepare for the worst. He then turned to Sarah. "We have to find those sleeper cells," he said. "We have to stop them before they can carry out their plans." But where would they even begin? The United States was a vast country, and the sleeper cells could be anywhere. They needed a clue, something that would point them in the right direction. Suddenly, Miller remembered something that Richter had said. He had said that the key was hidden in a song, a traditional German folk song that was known to only a few people. He realized that the folk song might also contain clues about the location of the sleeper cells. He asked Strauss if he knew anything about the folk song. Strauss said that he did. He said that the song was about a journey, a pilgrimage to a sacred place. He said that the lyrics of the song contained a series of place names and landmarks that were significant to the German people. Miller and Sarah realized that these place names and landmarks might be the locations of the sleeper cells. They began to study the lyrics of the folk song, searching for any clues that might lead them to the sleeper cells. They pored over maps of the United States, looking for places that matched the descriptions in the song. Days turned into nights, and still they found nothing. The sleeper cells remained hidden, waiting to strike. The tension was unbearable. Miller could feel the weight of responsibility pressing down on him. He knew that the fate of the country rested on his shoulders. Just when he was about to lose hope, Sarah noticed something odd about one of the place names in the song. It was the name of a small town in Pennsylvania called Germantown. Germantown. The name itself was a clue. It was a town founded by German immigrants, a place where German culture and traditions were still alive. Miller and Sarah realized that Germantown might be the location of one of the sleeper cells. They immediately dispatched a team of soldiers to Germantown with orders to search the town for any signs of suspicious activity. The soldiers arrived in Germantown and began to search the town. They questioned the residents, searched the buildings, and scoured the surrounding countryside, but they found nothing. The town seemed peaceful and quiet. Just when they were about to give up, one of the soldiers noticed something odd about the town's church. It was an old stone church with a tall steeple. The soldier noticed that the steeple was slightly askew. He climbed up to the steeple and discovered a hidden compartment. He opened the compartment and found a cache of weapons and explosives. He had found the sleeper cell. The soldiers quickly apprehended the members of the sleeper cell and confiscated their weapons and explosives. They had stopped one of the instruments from playing in the symphony, but there were still others out there waiting to strike. Miller and Sarah knew that they had to keep searching, keep hunting, until they had found all of the sleeper cells and silenced the symphony for good. They pored over the lyrics of the folk song again, searching for other clues. They identified several other place names and landmarks that seemed significant. They dispatched teams of soldiers to each of these locations with orders to search for sleeper cells. One by one, the soldiers found the sleeper cells and apprehended their members. The instruments were being silenced, but the symphony was still playing. Even with the sleeper cells neutralized, there were still other elements of the German plan that were unknown. The key and device were inert. The sleeper cells were neutralized or in custody, but the radio broadcast. It was as if they were missing something. Then, going over the notes and maps, Miller began to fixate on a symbol that appeared in the strangest of places, carved into the wood of the chapel altar, etched into the base of a statue in Germantown. A seemingly insignificant mark, two overlapping circles with a small triangle nestled in the center. Neither Sarah nor Miller recognized the symbol, but it nagged at them. It was too consistent to be a coincidence. Sarah remembered an art historian acquaintance from before the war, a specialist in obscure Germanic iconography. Perhaps he could shed light on the symbol's meaning. They tracked down the historian, now working in a mundane government job far from his passion. Initially hesitant, the old scholar's eyes lit up when he saw the symbol. "Ah, the Weltanage," he exclaimed, "the world eye. It's an ancient symbol predating even the Germanic tribes." He explained that the Weltanage represented a hidden order, a secret society dedicated to preserving ancient knowledge and wielding power from the shadows. But what does it mean in this context? Miller pressed. The historian hesitated, a flicker of fear in his eyes. It means they are not who you think they are. Their goals extend far beyond this war. A hidden order pulling the strings from the shadows. The symphony wasn't just about crippling the United States, it was about something far grander, far more sinister. It was about reshaping the world according to the twisted vision of this secret society. But who were they, and what was their ultimate goal? The historian offered one final clue: look to the music itself. The symphony, you said, listen not just to the notes but to the silences between them. Therein lies the true meaning. Miller and Sarah returned to the musical score, listening intently to the recording. They focused not on the melody but on the pauses, the rests, the subtle variations in tempo. As they listened, they began to notice a pattern, a subtle rhythm that seemed to pulse beneath the surface of the music. It was a code, a series of clicks and pauses that corresponded to letters of the alphabet. They painstakingly transcribed the code, deciphering the message hidden within the silences. The message was short but chilling. The Fourth Reich rises beneath the New Jerusalem. The Fourth Reich, a resurgence of Nazi ideology not in Germany but in the United States. The New Jerusalem, a code name, a location, but where? Miller and Sarah stared at each other, their minds racing. The Fourth Reich rises beneath the New Jerusalem. It was a terrifying prospect. But where was this New Jerusalem? Suddenly, Sarah remembered something. She remembered reading about a religious cult that had established a settlement in the Arizona desert in the early 20th century. They called their settlement New Jerusalem. Miller and Sarah exchanged a look of grim determination. They knew where they had to go. They had to go to Arizona and confront the forces of the Fourth Reich before it was too late. They gathered their gear and prepared for their journey. As they were leaving the prisoner of war camp, Miller paused and looked back at the barbed wire fence, at the watchtowers, at the men who were still trapped inside. He knew that he was leaving them behind, but he also knew that he had a greater duty to fulfill. He had to stop the symphony, to silence the instruments, to prevent the rise of the Fourth Reich. He turned and walked away, his face set with determination. The road to Arizona was long and arduous. Miller and Sarah drove for days, their minds focused on the task ahead. They knew that they were heading into danger, but they were determined to see their mission through. As they drove, they discussed their strategy. They knew that they couldn't simply storm the settlement. They had to be careful, methodical. They had to gather intelligence, identify the leaders of the cult, and devise a plan to neutralize them. They also had to be prepared for anything. The cult members were likely armed and dangerous, and they would stop at nothing to protect their beliefs. Finally, after days of driving, they arrived in Arizona. They found the settlement of New Jerusalem nestled in a remote valley, surrounded by towering cliffs and barren desert. It was a desolate and isolated place, a perfect location for a cult to hide. Miller and Sarah parked their car a few miles from the settlement and hiked the rest of the way on foot. They approached the settlement cautiously, staying hidden in the shadows. As they got closer, they could see that the settlement was heavily guarded. There were armed men patrolling the perimeter, and there were watchtowers overlooking the valley. It was clear that the cult members were expecting trouble. Miller and Sarah knew that they couldn't attack the settlement head-on. They had to find another way in. They decided to try to infiltrate the settlement disguised as new recruits. They changed into simple clothes and approached the main gate. As they approached the gate, they were stopped by two armed guards. The guards demanded to know who they were and what they wanted. Miller stepped forward and said, "We are seekers. We have heard about the New Jerusalem and we have come to find enlightenment." The guards looked at each other suspiciously. Then one of them said, "Wait here, I will get the leader." The guard went inside the gate and disappeared. Miller and Sarah waited anxiously, their hearts pounding in their chests. They knew that their plan was risky, but they had no other choice. After a few minutes, the guard returned, accompanied by a man in a long black robe. The man had a stern face and piercing eyes. This was their leader, the man they had to deceive. The leader looked at Miller and Sarah intently. Then he said, "Welcome to the New Jerusalem. I am Brother Elias. Follow me." The man was Richter, but how? What was he doing here, thousands of miles from the prisoner of war camp? How had he escaped? And what was his role in this twisted symphony? He smiled, a chilling, knowing smile. "I've been expecting you."